Chapter 33. Victor had driven for hours. It had been a little rough getting familiar with the steering, acceleration, and braking in the van, but as time had passed, it seemed less intimidating. He had quickly learned that staying in the right lanes on the highways to allow smaller vehicles to pass was the best way to avoid problems, and it let him catch a glimpse into life in this time period that he would never have been able to before. He had particularly enjoyed reading the advertisement billboards that lined the highway. There were signs portraying delicious cheeseburgers, sleek-looking automobiles, low-priced fuel for vehicles, exciting theme parks, and numerous other goods and services. Most of the signs were electronic and changed every few seconds. Because of the low speed at which he felt comfortable traveling, he was able to see many more. It was especially helpful since Jennifer had not awakened at all during the drive. He tried to make mental notes of things to ask her when she did wake up. His list of things to learn about included items such as Dr. Pepper, cows holding misspelled signs recommending that people eat more chicken, liking businesses on Facebook, and a movie based on The Legend of Zelda. Ultimately, though, he knew what he wanted to do with his time before they met with the others again, and he did not need the assistance of electronic advertisements to get the idea. He looked back at Jennifer and smiled, hoping that she would appreciate his plan. It took some time before he discovered what commands were recognized, but he was eventually able to use a friendly voice-operated personal assistant feature in the van to make a reservation for two as he continued driving. The sun had begun to set when he arrived in the city to which he was headed. Advertisements helped him locate a motel with inexpensive lodging, and he parked at one of them. He woke Jennifer, and she smiled at him. He returned the smile and helped her out of the van. "Wow," she said softly, "I'm starving." "Let's clean up a bit, and then we can get some food," said Victor with a smile. It was not long before he had paid for 2 separate rooms for the two of them and obtained keys. He escorted her down the hall that led to her room and opened the door. "Thank you," she said as he placed the key in her hand. "I'll be back in 20 minutes, he said. She nodded as he opened the door to the room next to hers and disappeared. She closed the door of her room and proceeded toward the shower. She realized it had been a long time since she had been able to really shower. She stripped off her clothing and let the hot water run down her body. Before long, her growling stomach informed her that as relaxing as her shower was, she really wanted to eat. She dried off, wrapped her towel around herself, and then looked at her clothing. Though she had been pleased to get her dress back after escaping the syndicate compound, she now disliked the thought of having to get back into dirty clothing. Fortunately, she remembered that they were no longer relegated to huddling around campfires after a shipwreck. Even in a low-end motel, she remembered that she should be able to find a washer in the Golden Age. She located it in the closet. She placed her clothing inside and pressed the buttons that began the cleaning process. The machine shook slightly as it removed the dust and grime of her travels. She smiled as she looked into the mirror and dried her long blonde hair. After a while, the washing machine buzzed to indicate that it had completed its washing and drying cycles, and that her clothing was now clean. She opened the lid and retrieved her outfit. In a short time, she was dressed and ready to go. She opened the door and looked outside. The door of the room just next to hers opened, and a cleaner and more polished-looking Victor emerged. He smiled as he looked at Jennifer. She grinned as she saw him. "Victor," she said. "Jennifer," he said, "you look beautiful." She blushed slightly. "You don't look too bad yourself," she said softly. He blushed slightly and then grabbed her hand. Her heart raced as he pulled her toward the van. "I've got an idea for dinner," he said. "What is it?" asked Jennifer. "Phillips," said Victor. "I remember you reviewed it quite favorably." Jennifer laughed. "I did," she confessed. "That sounds fantastic." Soon the van was headed down the road. Jennifer helped navigate to the restaurant, even though Victor had obtained directions when he had made a reservation. Before long, they pulled into a modest parking lot. Victor helped Jennifer out of the van and took her hand as they walked toward the lit door. As they came in, the large fish tank caught their attention. This time, it was filled with water, and dozens of brightly colored fish darted in between the various rocks in the tank. Jennifer smiled widely. "Jennifer Cedar," came an accented voice from within the restaurant. "Is that you?" "Philip!" exclaimed Jennifer with a laugh. A large man with a thick black mustache waddled toward them. He had a chef apron with a few small spots of tomato sauce spattered across it. "It is you!" exclaimed Philip happily. "You look different, though. Perhaps you are happy because of the company you brought." Jennifer blushed as she looked at Victor. He smiled widely. "Yes," said Philip. "Yes, I think that is it. Well, don't just stand there. I have the perfect booth for you. Come, come." Philip motioned for the couple. They followed him to a corner booth from where they could see the fish darting around. They sat together as Philip's staff took the extra cups and plates and poured water for them. "Now, what is your name, young man?" asked Philip with a smile. "Victor," replied Victor. Philip grabbed his hand and shook it vigorously. Then he got close to Victor's ear to whisper. "You take good care of her," he whispered intensely. Victor smiled. "Of course," he said. Philip smiled as he looked back at Jennifer. "Let the server know what you would like to drink," said Philip. "I will be back." The plump chef waddled away and began speaking to his staff. Though Victor did not understand the language, he smiled as he saw the staff scurrying to follow his instructions. "What can I get you to drink?" asked the young server girl. "What's your favorite?" whispered Victor to Jennifer. "The strawberry lemonade," replied Jennifer. "Let's have 2 strawberry lemonades," said Victor. The server smiled and promised to return soon. Before long they were sipping their beverages and waiting for fettuccine with creamy sauce, flavorful mushrooms, and juicy meatballs. Jennifer looked at Victor. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said softly. The lights in the restaurant dimmed, and small white lights provided low ambient light all around. Jennifer smiled as she looked over to Philip. He put his thumb up, down, and back up with a quizzical look on his face to seek her opinion. Jennifer put her thumb up and mouthed "thank you" to the plump chef. He laughed loudly and waddled to the kitchen. "Yeah, I got the impression that you might like it," replied Victor as he looked into her eyes. The small lights reflected in his large eyes, and Jennifer grinned as she stared at him. "Also, it's nice to get away from the others. Don't get me wrong, I think Lizard's air quotes are funny, and Lucas's trivia knowledge is sometimes interesting, but after what happened with the Syndicate, I think that some time off is exactly what everyone needed." Jennifer laughed. "I couldn't agree more," she said. "Using my key to come back here seemed to drain me more than usual. I'm glad we have a moment to breathe before we get shot at again." Victor smiled. "Do you think that we will really be able to change things?" asked Victor in a suddenly serious tone. "I mean, I really thought that everything would change once we beat Daniel in Antarctica." "I did too," confessed Jennifer. She disliked hearing the worry in Victor's voice, but she was unsure how to respond. "Well, I don't think it will hurt to try," said Victor more confidently as he looked around. "I can see why you loved this place." "Yeah," said Jennifer cheerfully. "Just wait until you taste the food." "It smells fantastic," said Victor. Just as he finished speaking, the server brought their plates of food to them. "Anything else I can get for you?" asked the server politely. "No, thank you," replied Jennifer with a smile. Before long they were devouring their meals. Victor's eyes grew wide as he chewed on the soft noodles. The creamy flavor of the sauce made him stop his chewing so he could enjoy the flavor, even considering how hungry he was. Jennifer had been right. This was perhaps the best meal that Victor had ever eaten. Jennifer set aside all protocol as she greedily slurped the long, thin noodles. Philip laughed loudly as he watched her eating. "You must be hungry, Jennifer," he said. She nodded as she got another bite ready. The mild seasonings blended with the flavor of the meat perfectly. After stuffing their faces for a while, they slowed down. "It's so good," said Victor. Philip smiled as he heard the sincerity in Victor's voice, but said nothing. Finally, they began sipping their beverages slowly. "So, Jennifer," said Victor, "I had something I wanted to ask you. I hope it won't be too awkward." Jennifer smiled as she looked into Victor's eyes, hoping that he was about to confess his feelings for her. "Do you remember any more of your time?" asked Victor. Jennifer closed her eyes as she thought back. She remembered how much of a shock it had been when Erica had reminded her that she came from the distant past. She had not had much success recalling anything at Stephanie's request, and so much had happened since then that she had stopped trying to remember her past. Now that she was relaxed, an image began appearing in her mind. "It's all right if you don't want to talk about it," said Victor as he sensed her initial discomfort. "No, it's okay," said Jennifer as she opened her eyes. She remembered a woman with whom she frequently spoke. She remembered her wavy brown hair and dark brown eyes. They had laughed together. She struggled to remember her name. "Chloe Baldwin," said Jennifer. "Who was that?" asked Victor. "She was a friend," said Jennifer. She remembered another girl with straight hair and green eyes. She also smiled, but Jennifer could tell she was hiding something. She struggled to remember her name. "Molly Patterson," said Jennifer. "Another friend?" asked Victor. "I think so," said Jennifer. Suddenly she remembered seeing mirrored keys on chains that hung about their necks. They were divine key bearers. "The first Council of 9, said Victor. "You were there in the beginning." Jennifer suddenly felt uncomfortable and out of place. She turned away. Victor took her hand. "I don't think that's a bad thing, Jennifer," said Victor. His smile made her relax. She pulled a golden lock of hair behind her ear. "Victor," she said. "Yes?" he asked. "You seriously don't think it's weird that I come from a time hundreds of years ago?" she asked. "No," said Victor. "I don't think that's weird at all." Jennifer smiled as she heard the sincerity in his voice. "I'm glad you brought me here, Victor," she said. He smiled. "Yeah," he said. "I was worried you might think it sounded cheesy." "Why would you think that?" asked Jennifer as she scooted closer to him. "Oh, you know," said Victor. "I may only have a few meals left." Jennifer furrowed her brow with concern. "What?" she said. "You know, because of what we're planning to do," he said, hoping he had said enough. "What do you mean?" asked Jennifer. "Well, if we stop the destroyer, the world into which I was born will not exist," said Victor. "Even if I do exist, I probably won't come back here." Notwithstanding Row 82 mentioning the risk of paradox before they had traveled back in time, the possibility had not crossed her mind that all their plans might take Victor from her. She shook her head. Tears welled up in her eyes as she thought of losing him. She suddenly regretted coming back in time at all, as moving as Sig's speech had been. She had the time key. It should have been up to her to understand how time worked. She had to find out what would happen to Victor. She refused to risk him. She glanced down at her mirrored key and gripped it. Everything came to a halt around her as her eyes glowed. She stood up and began walking toward the door. "What are you doing?" asked Victor as he stood up and followed after her. Jennifer jumped with a start. She had intended to slow time for everyone else. She did not understand how Victor was moving with her. She was trying to get an answer to an important question. Came a voice from the other side of the room. A man approached from the door. Victor's eyes widened as the man came into view. Jennifer's head flew back and forth between the man and Victor. "What is this?" asked Victor. "My name is Michael," said the man, "and there is something you should know. Victor will die if you leave him now." The sincerity in his voice took Jennifer's breath away. "Where were you going?" Victor asked Jennifer. I don't know," said Jennifer. I hadn't realized that changing the future might take you away from me." Victor smiled at her genuine concern and took her hands. "Jennifer Cedar," said Michael, "you have had the lingering feeling that you were late for something." "Who are you really?" asked Jennifer. "How do you know this?" "I am the Archangel," replied Michael. "I gave you the key of time." Suddenly a flood of memories came rushing back. She held her head and stumbled. Victor held her close. "Are you okay?" whispered Victor. Jennifer regained her balance and looked into Victor's eyes. "Yes," said Jennifer. "I remember why I thought I was too late." "What happened?" asked Victor. "Molly Patterson," said Jennifer sadly. "I was too late to save her." "What happened to her?" asked Victor. "She took her own life," said Jennifer. "Nothing was the same after that." "She did so out of a feeling of guilt," said Michael. "Guilt?" asked Jennifer. "She murdered a man." "What?" exclaimed Jennifer. "She was worried about the future," said Michael. "Why didn't she talk to Chloe Baldwin?" asked Jennifer. "She had the key of prophecy." "She wanted to act before Chloe knew," said Michael. "She believed she was protecting the council." "By killing herself?" exclaimed Jennifer. "No, by murdering another," clarified Michael calmly. "She wouldn't do that," said Jennifer at last. "To what lengths would you go to protect Victor?" asked Michael. There was an awkward pause as Jennifer considered what he said. "What do you want, Michael?" asked Jennifer. "I need you to understand something," said Michael. "Victor will not be killed by your change in the timeline, but he and all the other members of the council in his age will be thrown back into their own time." "Why weren't we thrown back into our own time before?" asked Victor. "You should have realized by now that you were destined to come back and do as you did," replied Michael. "You helped create the world into which you were born." "That wasn't our intention," said Victor. "It was to redeem Earth." "Surely you understand that if you had not done what you did, the Archdemon would have completely annihilated the Earth," said Michael. Victor reluctantly nodded. "And what you are trying to do now is important as well," said Michael. "It will change the future, and it is vital for you to understand your role, Victor." "If my role was so vital, why come to me only now?" asked Victor. "Do not misunderstand me," said Michael. "I do not intend to reveal everything now. Some things, if learned too soon, cause more harm than good. That is precisely what happened with Molly Patterson." "What are you saying?" asked Jennifer. "She was the betrayer with good intentions," said Michael. Jennifer recalled Aaron Pratt's warning about the 3 betrayers, and her eyes widened. "What did she know?" asked Jennifer. "The time for this knowledge is not yet," replied Michael. "What you must know is that when the timeline is changed, you should be with Victor. You will also need to know that he will be put back into his time." "Wait," said Jennifer. Michael ignored her as he vanished out of sight. "Are you okay?" asked Philip as he noticed Jennifer shouting. "What is wrong?" He became instinctively angry with Victor, assuming he had done something to upset her, but she turned to Victor and held him close. He paused, hoping for the awkward moment to pass. "It will be okay," said Victor. He was reassuring himself as much as he was her. She felt overwhelmed and confused. In a few short moments, she had gone from enjoying the flavor of Philip's delicious fettuccine to recovering a huge amount of lost memory from another life, and finding out that it was possible that the man with which she had fallen in love was marching into something that was so awful one of her closest friends had killed someone, went insane, and committed suicide. Tears ran down her cheeks, and her body began shaking as she cried. "Victor," she sobbed, "I can't lose you." Philip felt even more awkward as he realized he had misjudged Victor. Victor pulled his arms around hers and gently pulled her head against his shoulder. The feeling of warmth and security surrounded Jennifer and seemed to swallow her worries. "Jennifer," said Victor in a calm and confident voice, "you won't lose me. Obviously, Michael would not have come except to help us. He wants us to stay together." Jennifer looked up into Victor's eyes. The experience with Michael that had upset her seemed to have had the opposite effect on Victor. "How?" asked Jennifer. "How can you be so calm?" "Michael just confirmed that we would be successful, and that I would survive," said Victor. "Certainly I am not expecting something easy, or that the future beyond that will be secure, but he seemed certain that we would be able to save the world." "Yes," said Jennifer, "but at what cost?" "I don't know," said Victor, "but if he wanted you to follow me, then it means that I don't have to lose you." Jennifer smiled as she heard his calm voice. She held him closely and closed her eyes. "So," said Philip awkwardly, "dessert?" Victor and Jennifer laughed loudly and nodded as they returned to their booth.